That's always fun to take those trips down memory lane. So let's see, what do I have for you today? My name is Bonnie. I also presented at uh, the one with the weird time zone, the other Fringe
APAC
Festival. So,
conference, right?
huh?
It was the APAC, right?
Yeah, yeah. I don't know why. It's Friday. I'm fried.
Oh, no, no, no
So,
worries, no worries. You're an alum, so.
so that was a lot of fun. So the way I want to do this is more like a conversation. So, I'm not going to be barreling through anything. I just really want to keep it engaging and just kind of share a little bit about I feel like it's a unique perspective because I tend to come at it from like an applied analytics place as an analyst. So what that means is I'm kind of upstream from all the sexy, data viz and, viz champions on stage. Yeah, I do visualization, but it's mostly exploratory versus explanatory. So what an applied analyst tends to do is my job is to create that data question, to formulate it in a way that we can find data to answer the question. And what happens a lot of times, we look at the available data or the data that's missing or the data we need to generate, and we need to reformulate the question. So beginning with the data question, I find is the biggest asset that I can share with people, because what happens, I'll sit down, in my work as a collaborative partner, and I'll say, okay, what's the data question? And then you hear crickets because they just want to have a Sankey diagram because one of those crazy twins over on Twitter keeps, putting out the templates. So, and I love them. I play with them all the time. The the Sankey charts, not the twins. So, but we need things that can't be broken by the client, that can be easily used by multiple end users. So simplicity is the name of the game. So this is me here. My home on the interwebs is Data and Donuts. I work I'm a member of the National Press Club, so I do a lot of public speaking, a lot of digital media presence in my Data and Donuts portal that you see here. I'm a member of the 500 Women Scientists group, Investigational Reporters and Editors, Association of Healthcare Journalists, and I teach Tableau to grad students, which might be my new favorite thing because we need to be data literate. Data literacy is everywhere. You can't go through Twitter without somebody or LinkedIn. Everyone's, working around data literacy. I like to take it a step forward and think about it as data fluency because, we could all sit around in our little areas generating data, analyzing data, but if we don't communicate the data and the findings, we're kind of not doing the whole job. And having said that, these tools here, Tableau is one of the tools. It was like my gateway data tool, I guess you might say, because it's so impactful and pretty learnable, very learnable. And so what I tend to do is I use, Python and R, like Will and Caesar were just talking about other data sets that aren't amenable to Tableau. Some of them can benefit, from a little Python and R rubbing and fixing. And you'll see a little more Python than R in this presentation because I just got back from a workshop where I was teaching pandas, the library. So I use a lot of these tools sometimes just to get quick answers. I'm trying to get the deep insights. So Qualtrics is a tool I use. A lot of times we generate our data through surveys and survey analytics. And the problem with that is a lot of people think that, let's just get somebody to, write up a few questions. We'll send it out on the internet and we'll have data. But the problem is the whole point of getting that data is to get the bias, limit the bias in the question structure, the question format, the types of questions we ask. For example, everyone's using Likert all the time. Likert survey questions. I personally don't like them, and I try to eliminate them whenever I can, only because if I answer a set of questions and suppose it's a 7 scale question, you can't say anything about the 7 on that question and the 7 on that one and the 7 on the other. They're really not relatable. Because I go to one extreme on one scale doesn't mean I feel the same level of strength for another question or on a different topic. So I tend to use a lot of decision choice analytics, and Qualtrics is very good at doing some of the advanced question design where I can find out why someone does it and align it a little bit with their behavior and their learning methods and their biases, because we all have them and we bring them to the table. The job of those of us trying to curate this data is to minimize them, because if you write your questions wrong, you may fall victim to satisficing, which is when someone just looks at a survey and is like, 3, or 5, those sorts of things. Now you don't know within this group of respondents how bias has entered into your final interpretation. So that's, oh, look, there I am. That's me. If you want to, if you want to see me with my microphone, there you go. There's a bunch of different data sources that I talk about here. And this is just a free resource in here of just a lot of things that you can grab if you have questions. There's tools for people to use. It's all free. I'm not going to retire on this sort of a thing, but what I like to point out is measuring what we should, not what we can. A lot of times the data that comes to the table is what the guy over has that produced it and sent it down the pipe for someone to start analyzing it. Is it really the best data, or is it low-hanging fruit? So these are all, there's a lot in here, and it's all searchable and it's free. So now back to the Women in Tech. This is the Women in Tech Summit, which was kind of my springboard to talking at Women in Data today, because it's a huge summit. This room was one size, and they had to expand it out and seating along the back because people really just wanted to know about the data, simple data. So what was funny here in this picture, if we're going to talk about bias and where your attention is focused when you're looking at something visually, I cropped myself out of the photo because if you know me, you know I'm an ultra distance runner. And what comes with that is some freakishly developed gastrocnemius muscles, calves. So when I showed the picture of this photograph, people were like, oh my God, what's wrong with your legs? And so I wanted to focus attention over here to the gentleman in the back of the room. So I had to crop myself out and circle him, because what was funny about this was we were talking about data and I felt like he really should be pulled into the conversation and be included. So I asked him a question about something we were talking about, and the poor guy, he was on his phone and didn't have any idea what we were talking about. So it was kind of amusing that the one dude in the room wasn't even paying attention. Now here, I'm not playing this for you, but what I wanted to do is visually we remember things a lot better. This, Kevin Slavin, gosh, about 2015, I wrote a blog article about algorithms in some detail about the competition that Netflix had with about trying to improve their movie matching algorithm by only 10%. They wanted that, and I think the company who won was called Pragmatic Chaos, and it was a cautionary tale about what happens when we make humans kind of far away in the digital conversation. So every time someone asks me to talk about AI, if they're on the pro AI side, they tend to be maybe they're a little disappointed. I don't know. I feel like a lot of times, because I work in healthcare, a lot of this technology is putting a big distance between the patient and the provider, and that's not always a good thing. So I wanted you to maybe look up this TED Talk by Kevin Slavin called How Algorithms Shape Our World. It's a brilliant one and definitely worth your time. Now, visually, people like going to museums with me because I'm a little weird. I see things that I can use in a workshop, in a class that I'm teaching. I teach Tableau to grad students. So I like to kind of surprise them with things because it's easy to look at a data visualization and get a little mock offense. Like, why'd they do that? What's with these colors? Like, wait till you see my non-colorblind friendly colors. Every time I give a talk on Tableau, the person in front of me tells me something I wish I had known like a week or two ago. I mean, I knew about it, but I wasn't really paying attention. I was just trying to get through it with a busy travel schedule. But anyway, when you look at something like this, it's a little harder. But what I saw right away is like, why is that food on the floor? That's kind of weird. That thing's going to rot, you know? And then I started looking at it. I'm like, you know, this is kind of like how we build our visualizations. Some things that we don't want people to really see, we might downplay them a little bit. And then the things that are really fancy and fun and, you know, get a lot of wow impact, they're like the little bird on the finger. You know, let me feature this at the top of the graphic. And what's really interesting, what I see in this picture is bias, because if you notice, the stuff on the floor comes out of the dirt and the earth. And synonymous with that is it's also the food of the peasants. This is the food that the lower echelon in society gets to eat. So the things that are relegated to a higher level, they've been elevated to the top of the table. And you see like the kumquats and the little tomatoes and the figs and the birds and all of those things are elevated up off the floor to a higher status. And my argument here is that maybe we make similar decisions when we're looking at our data. Now, I found out because of my interest in Netflix and their algorithm and Stitch Fix and all these kind of predictive models and how they work. I found out that you can download your Netflix history right off the website. And I was like scared, but a little like, I love when data becomes available so I can play around with it. So I downloaded my Netflix history, and it's like thousands of like rows. But I thought it would be pretty interesting. So all I had to do in Tableau Prep, all I had to do, air quotes, it's pretty easy though, because I was able to split the year, clean up the year column. This was probably a split and I threw away the stuff I didn't need. And then the titles, I cleaned them up a little bit so at least I could figure out what the title was. And the dates were fine the way they were. I kept the actual date because I didn't know if I wanted to do something with that later. And then only thing I really had to add was genre. And you may feel like the genre is somewhat limited, but I really just had to bucket things in quickly because this could have been a huge time sink. And it was very, very interesting to pull in the data. And I also cheated a little bit. Here's where Python came in, because I'm like, I don't know what some of these movies even are. How do I assign them to, this is when I was early on, when I was in like the first 500. After that, I was like, it's all drama. But before that, I was trying to be very precise. So what I did is I wrote some Python code. Of course, there's IMDb Pi, and you download it. And then once you get this all downloaded and running, which takes like, I don't know, not even 10 minutes to tell you the truth, you can just fill in the movie that you're looking up right here. You just type it into the little parens and it'll find it and it'll tell you right here what the genre is. Now, so two things here. I picked A Town Called Panic because it's my favorite movie to watch with kids because it doesn't make you like crazy. It's a funny movie. It's French. If you can find it, please watch it. It is hysterical. But anyway, and then I look at how they tag this. Now, how many animation, adventure, comedy, family, fantasy movies do you think I could roll in under this bucket? So already I have to decide, is this animation? Is it adventure? Is it comedy, family? I'm making a decision of how I'm going to aggregate and label this data right off the bat. So no judging, right? So basically, here's what I did: is I have my genres here, my years here. And this is more of my exploratory stuff. Color coded the genre, and then what happens here is when I hit it, it'll show what was under that category. So, yay for me! The only talk show I watch is David Letterman. My next guest needs no introduction. But if you hit if you look around at your different genres that you have, you can look and see, animation, when animation was big, what's next? Comedy drama. I guess things got funny in 2017. But then you can see all the movies that fall in underneath it. I mean, I think that for some like dopey little free spreadsheet that came out of Netflix, I really had a pretty good time with this. My reality TV, they also labeled reality TVs like Anthony Bourdain. Some of them were considered reality TV, some were considered documentaries, but you get, so there's bias in there too, like how I categorize them. But, I think you would agree this is a pretty fun little exercise. I don't know why Undercover Boss season 1 waste management is a romance. Either it tells you a lot about like me, or this is some stuff that got rolled up that shouldn't have been. That's what we're gonna stick with that as an explanation. Now, what's fun here, just real quick to end this Netflix algorithm story, is that you can kind of look through your binge watching. Oh, look, here we are, Anthony Bourdain. You can identify patterns in your data watching and find out what you were watching. This wasn't me, but Archer season 1, they really went to town here. You can tell it's a binge because the quarter and the date are pretty much the same. And I mean, maybe it's just me, but I think this is fun. Yeah, my kids love Arrested Development. But so just from a simple spreadsheet that just had a whole bunch of information listed in it. I mean, look at the insights that you could glean from that. Now, back to the data sources. Now, I always say this one thing that seems to get in everyone's bonnet about there's no such thing as, there's always bias in data. People are like, well, what about raw data? I'm like, raw data is biased because raw data is the data you decided you wanted to bring to the table for the conversation. So once you pull it in, it already has something from you, your heuristics, your biases, any of that is already involved, which doesn't mean it's not the best thing we have, but I'm just saying we need to be aware of that. Now, what we learned from Mimi, she's a mixed media artist, and she has this, there's a new one too out, version 2, but it's called the Library of Missing Data Sets, which I thought was fascinating to hear about. And what's in here is not like the data that we're allowed to see is like freely available. You can get certain types of, the Medicare data for free and open data sources and things in almost, in your county where you live and your community. There's lots and lots of free data and openly accessible data if you have a certain amount of data skills. But then we have the stuff that's, we're not supposed to be looking at it. It's not freely available. And as a member of the National Press Club, we have to do a lot of Freedom of Information Act stuff, like the stuff that's coming to forbearance on like the impeachment hearings or the opioid epidemic. A lot of that data, wasn't just handed over to the reporters or journalists. It had to be requested through a Freedom of Information Act, and then they have to grant your request. And then what Mimi reminded me of is, what about the data that we're not even collecting? And a lot of it is around, underserved populations, minorities. And if you look through, there's like just different types of information that these are all empty files as part of her exhibit. And it's just telling you this is data we don't even have. Like the one she in this picture here is the global use of VPNs. We don't know it. We don't collect that sort of data. Anything about foreign intelligence, things that should be publicly available that aren't. So it's always important to be aware of what information is missing from the conversation, because that could be a potential source of bias. And I think we've seen this thing, but I mean, I think this is really neat because these are tricks that people use when they're trying to get our attention visually. They want you, what should we remember? Oh, you should remember this. So it's going to be bigger and brighter. And here, look, I'm going to put a lot of busy information here so that I can draw your attention here rather than there. And, maybe you need to act fast. So I'm going to just include like one little filter or one kind of association at the expense of other things that might be more relevant and more germane to the conversation. Oh, let me log in and I'll talk you through this. So what this is here is, I wanted to find out what people thought about algorithms in general. So, being a consummate research professional, I go to Twitter. I just went here because I have the API and I thought, well, I threw out some other things first. But really interestingly, if you know anything about the Twitter Pulse Checker, you can look and see, this is a little instructional way. I wanted to include this in case you wanted to be able to do this. You can go into GitHub and pull down a lot of this code. So you import a lot of stuff. This is all you do is you write this stuff. You don't have to know anything special to do it. There's my Twitter credentials, but I use it all the time when I'm looking for things or looking for some sentiment analysis. So basically, I just went in with the word algorithm and I limited this so it wouldn't overload the system. But what's really interesting about this is you get a lot of information about likes, replies, retweets, and then we all make assumptions about that. But we can look at usernames, IDs, and you can filter it by range, by date range, which is really important if you want something super timely, news that just broke, and you want to see what people are saying about that versus, the whole universe of things they could be saying about these sorts of things. So let me just scroll down because there's just a couple points I wanted to make. This right here, like if there was something really new that just happened and I don't want to gather everything on the universe, I can filter out certain tags. Like suppose I was saying something about Seattle that was extremely relevant and the Seahawks just won the Super Bowl or something. I could eliminate, the Seahawks or something like that, just to make it more relevant to what I'm looking at. But what I wanted to show you here is this negative polarity, and what it's showing up is around Google, because that news story that broke about Google partnering with Ascension. So there's a lot of different things that could be driving that, but the sentiment was basically negative. And when I wanted to visualize it, you can visualize it here, and it's all blue. So this means that these were the most popular tags. They were all negative, but they were very popular. And the most liked negative tags were things around, I don't even know what half this stuff is. But then the positive stuff is just these little two tiny things, algorithm and whatever this is. But here we start seeing a lot of what we think about when we think of big data, machine learning. And I don't want to get lost down that sink, but I think it's really interesting to know how Twitter can also help you get a handle on bias. And one of my favorite things about the conference was them talking about Anscombe's quartet, because those of us who work in data visualization and analytics, let me just give you a quick reminder of what this is. It's basically these 4 buckets of numbers, and if you tally them the same and you didn't look at the visualization, they all have the same descriptive statistics. And where it gets interesting is when you visualize them and then you realize these are not the same thing, right? You can kind of tell what caused the skewing that had them have a lot of the same descriptive statistics. Like, what's this guy doing here? So that's just a reminder. And then, because it was at the conference, I thought, well, is there a real life example of Anscombe's quartet? And lo and behold, this dissecting racial bias in an algorithm used to manage the health of populations. And I'll just summarize this real quick. If you want the article, reach out to me. I'll send it to you. I don't know if it's freely available to everybody. But what's really interesting about what happened here is there's this big algorithm that was used, and they used healthcare costs to think about how much somebody used a healthcare system, how sick they might be. They decided that the costs would be what they would use, because large health systems and payers, they have to rely on an algorithm to target populations that really need this high risk care management, right? So they deploy them on large scales, but a lot of times they're proprietary. So we don't know what's going on under the hood. We don't know why someone got put into this category versus that category. But when you start unpacking it and you look, in this one, we found out that it was healthcare costs, which could be a little problematic because, and we'll see that in a minute, because if you look at healthcare costs as a proxy for illness, then you're looking at what about if you belong to a minority population, your access is the barrier. Your access to care is the barrier. So you're not going to get put into the higher risk program that you might need because you have comorbid disease and you're profoundly ill, because without the access to care, you're not generating the health care costs. So you're not being referred to. So here's where the ANSCOM part comes in. So what we have here is there's a whole reason why this methodology was done and how somebody was classified as black and as white. It was done for the simplicity of understanding this algorithm and trying to unpack it. So what you see here is black is on top and white is on the bottom. So what this means is if you're getting defaulted into the program, you're referred for screening here and you go into the program here. Who has the highest uncontrolled blood pressure and disease by score if you're looking at healthcare costs? All right, you can tell that you have to be a lot sicker to get put into that high risk care management program. And you can see that consistently through hypertension, diabetes, renal failure, back. You wouldn't know about any of this if you didn't try to visualize this data. So this is the little ANSCOM connection. And then when you look over here as well, cost versus algorithmic predicted risks and cost versus health. So when we stop looking at cost and we're looking more at your risk, then we see the curves start coming closer together. Let me go back here. So here, when we remove that bias and we just went to the sickness, when we went and looked at the measures of illness and not using medical expenditure, now you can see a fairer viewing of how to decide who gets into the program, right? Because look, the curves are much, 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 much closer now. So, what I like to think about is what kind of bias do we bring into, our, discussions on medicine. And what I thought was really interesting here is what we're looking at here is, are you born in the US or not? So these folks are not born in the US. These people are. And if you look at, I don't know why this isn't picking up here, but if you look at the median, it's not that far off. Usually we think that, the healthcare costs are driven by people that weren't born here, that are different, and it's not the case. I mean, we can see the spread here, but when we start looking at the data, there's certain things that are hidden by the data. And if you look here, this right here is the expenses of the Black population versus the white population. Let me tell you a little bit about who these people are. This came out of MEPS, which is a medical expenditure survey that comes out of Census Data, and these are medical expense and healthcare costs that are asked to populations of people. So, maybe the scale wouldn't be this dramatic, but you could, with more different data, but look, you can tell there's a marked difference between what people are paying and what, how sick they are. And I thought this was really relevant because, yes, I don't have access to the actual algorithm, but we can actually ask similar questions. And that applies here as well. When we look at things like employment status by region and by race. So what could be going on if we look at, let's see, it's easier if I take some of these away. So let's just go to here. So if we're looking at the South Atlantic division, we see the populations here. This is the white population and the African American population. But what we're looking at here is being in the labor force and not being in the labor force and being unemployed. So we have a lot of people not in the labor force, unemployed. There's different reasons for that, obviously. But you can also think of challenges and barriers these people might have to access care and things to be cost prohibitive and to think about social determinants of health. Look at the annual cost of utilities here. Now, if I compare that to, who should we compare it to? Let's see. You can sit there and compare into different regions and say, Well, the healthcare, the costs of utilities, of electric, of fuel could be higher in certain areas. This is just the sort of data that doesn't jump out at you when you're looking at a spreadsheet. And this is one of my favorites. This is a busy kind of a slide. It's to make a point, more or less. And let me explain to you what the point is. The point is that when we're doing analytics and we check a box about race, or we decide we want to collect data about race, what are we collecting it for? We need to ask ourselves that, because is it a social political construct, or is it a horribly weak biologic proxy? It's obviously a social construct that's been proven again and again and again. So what are we going to do with that information? Are we going to decide on resources? Are we lumping same with same? Are we saying people like this do things like that? Or what is the point? And my point in sharing this is, if you look and you classified as Black, now you want to know, well, who's in that bucket? Well, if you scroll down here, like I divided the Black race with the birthplace to find out, this is just from census data. And like, it's not just one thing. I mean, do you honestly think genomically or behaviorally that people from Africa are the same as Blacks in Canada, Connecticut, Cuba, Czechoslovakia? And you can say the same thing about the buckets for white people. People come from all diverse areas. What is it that we're trying to measure, and are we measuring it effectively? And this is just kind of more of that, where we look at, we always think of the emergency department as being the bucket to catch people that are underinsured or don't have insurance. And, when you start looking, by race, you don't necessarily see that play out in the data, because we're looking here, here's welfare income on the bottom. So meaning the higher you are in here, the more subsidized money you're having. And then here it is on the top in terms of how much money you're making. And the patterns don't look different from, other populations. So, that's another place where bias may have crept in. And now, all of this data I got, this dovetails nicely with the lead in with Caesar, and about how you find this data. I like to pull this kind of data into Python first, so I can see what I have, and then either pull it into Tableau Prep or do some of the work right here in Python. But this is all you need to write, and right off the bat, what do I get to see? I get to see the headings. I know what kind of what data I'm looking at, what buckets I'm are, employee status, do they have any health care? I mean, I'm familiar with what these labels are, but it comes with a guide. I should have hidden all this stuff, but really importantly though, is you get to find out, look, right in this data set, I have 15 numericals, 18 categorical, 2 Booleans. I can look and see if there's any data that's missing, how many zeros. I can look about correlation. I can see if anything needs to be recoded. And then I get a quick little overview of what's in the data set. Most people are living in 3-bedroom houses, for example. Birth year, I can look and see which birth years are the most representative. So you can actually look, oh, yep, most people have internet access. These are simple little things. Look, the citizenship question, a lot of people aren't answering it. Well, in today's climate, you can understand why you might want to not answer it. You could get picked up, going out in a carpool. So what I want to show you here is, just by writing a few things of code, you can find out, we have a good percentage of the population is educated. Employee status, they're employed. So I just wanted to show you that very simple coding through Python can generate all that information within 10 minutes. And, this speaks really well to that question about, how can we decide who's going to be making money? And what they decided to do is, like, what predictors can we have to figure out who's making a $50,000 income? So what variables might tell me if someone is going to make more than $50,000 a year? So here's all the data from that. But what I really wanted to just show you is what it generated. This is a little sampling of the data. This is all from Python. And so what you can see here is, when you look to see what affects income, we're just looking at age, education, number of years of education, we're looking at capital gains, and we're looking at how, hours per week that you work. And these are different measures of different things. So then we want to find out. So anyway, just to move on, because I want to save time for questions, an important part here is finding a model that can predict it. And the model that we chose, I think I got it to be about 91% of fit, which is very high. So what that means is all these other things that we hear people blathering about on the news about, like your race, gender, a lot of those things don't necessarily play into how much someone is making, or doesn't tell you about the potential for making $50,000. There's a lot more at play in the variable. And so when I went back and tried to recreate it, just using data with Tableau going into the census data, I created this. And what you'll see here real quick, it doesn't all fit here, boo-hoo. But if you look at education, you can kind of say that the more education you have, your salary is going up, and you're making more money. And it also varies by age groups as well. So you can actually take a little hint of a model that you see out in public, and you can try to figure out, if can you do some sleuthing and try to figure out, like I saw this sleep and neurocognitive decline in the Hispanic community, a health study of Latinos. And this already, because it's Alzheimer's, I already had my antenna up, like, oh, now what? What measures of chronic metabolic derangement are they going to talk about now? But basically what they say is there was nothing conclusive here at all. So I went to try to find some data, and I found people self-identifying as Hispanic in the census data. And I looked to see, where they were getting their insurance from. And that's why this is a yes or no. This is like a binary thing. Like I had to pick all the yeses of people that have the insurance. But when you look at the Hispanic population, you can see it's not one entity. There's Dominicans, Cuban, there's a lot here. So now if you look here, it looks like US born is what this is. No. So these people aren't from here. They, here's their insurance status, and you get one general impression. What happens though if I change it around a little bit? And obviously this isn't going to win any Iron Viz competition, but I switched yes to the top and no to the bottom, so I can view all the data. And I just used the numeric text because it doesn't take up as much room. You wouldn't give this obviously as an end deliverable, but what do you see? Everything flips now. You see all the US born people now are fitting in here differently than they did before. So just making a little decision to switch the order of a binary question when I'm looking at massive amounts of data, you could see how the other way of looking at it could distort a little bit. And again, healthcare expenses in Hispanic populations. So, I kind of did the same thing, and I looked at the emergency department thinking, oh, they're going to have a lot of emergency department because they don't have office-based care. How many prescriptions? Now, if you're not careful, so now when you look and you're looking at US born, and then you have to kind of switch it off and go to no, because a lot of these are masked from the underlying data, but the patterns are the same. So there's a lot of bias in what we believe in the media. And what I like about this one is looking at the health status by Hispanic origin. So, this is a very interesting look at who's got what kind of conditions coming in. Like asthma has been reported in the literature, but you can actually look at the expenditures in each, the question, the prompt on the census is, has anyone ever told you or diagnosed you with blah, 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 blah. So then we look at it, and then we can divide it up by population. So my point here isn't to teach you about the Hispanic population necessarily, but just to show you the different granularity in data to answer and address well-formulated data questions. And I did want to leave time for answers, but questions, and hopefully lots of answers for you. But what I thought was interesting here is the whole thing they talk about, well, Google used to have bias in their algorithm. I mean, my gosh, you used to put CEO in the search engine and everybody was white and male. And so what I thought was funny here is we kind of, oh, look, there's a little lady, a little brown man, they're trying, is it better? I would like to say yes. And this is just where to find me, how to find me over on Twitter, LinkedIn, oh, down there, I cut it off. And my new book, well, it's not out yet, barely even written, but it's called Autobiographicacy, A Year in Statistical Prose. And what's happening is there's a lot of data from this particular year, and we're revisiting it. And we're looking to see about some assumptions and political implications of some of the data that was circulating around a particular year. So that's all to come. And this little graphic here, which you probably can't see, there's a wonderful tool online, Merriam-Webster, if you wrote year you're born. What they do here is they're showing you what words first came into print the year you were born. So that lets you do a little bit of a sentiment analysis about the year you were born. And what's interesting, there was a lot of genetic information, and that was my graduate degree in population genetics. I am now done, and I guess we can do a little Q&A.
Yeah, definitely. Anyone have questions? Definitely. Yeah. Let's see. There's a note here. It said, didn't know that bias could so easily be ignored unintentionally. Yeah. Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, we always think of it being like, an intentional thing, that this bad person. We don't realize that inherently we're all kind of guilty of that sort of thing. And so, when we're the stewards of data and we can make these decisions ourselves, that we really have a lot of power in asking for more data to be pulled into the conversation.
I see a question in the Q&A. It really said that this is awesome. Mike is saying, I'm sorry I missed it, but are you using R scripting inside Tableau to tie to your model?
Well, here's the thing. I don't know if it's just me. I can only hold one programming language with high affinity at one time. And I was doing a big project with Python, but then I have to go to our studio in January in San Francisco. So now I'm going to be switching back to R, and I'll be running my programs in R. So I tend to kind of flip flop back and forth. And there were some problems with Catalina, the newest version of Tableau and TabPy, and I was trying to sort that out before I kind of updated all my R scripting. But you caught me. I do R a lot. I mean, I've trained more so in R, but my executive education in adaptive analytics, applied analytics at Columbia Food School of Engineering was all Python, like all day, every day for like 9 months. So that kind of was the last tool in my brain. So yeah, I do both. I've just been leaning a little heavier on Python.
I loved seeing your Python script there, which was about 7 lines of code, and I think probably 4 of those were just calling the different packages in. That was
Well,
really
and that's what I teach. What I teach in my workshops is that, we have to think of data, computer programming languages like VOTech, like vocational community colleges. When you go in, they're like, okay, today we're going to build a stool, right? Here's the wood, here's the 3 legs. Now we're going to like get our saws out and go nuts. They're not like, well, here's the history of what stools were made of in the prehistoric era, and they go on and on and on. There's a time and a place for that. But a lot of times what I do is I start with a library like pandas, and I teach you how to answer an immediate question. So once you use those libraries a couple times to do some data profiling in census data or whatever large data set you have, when my next thing to you is like, okay, well, let's see if we can look at a function. You're not like, your eyes don't turn into little X's and they glaze over. You're like, oh, okay, I've used this. I'm getting some familiarity. So I like to approach it from that vocational part where we're solving a problem. Here's the tool, and we add new tools into our tool belt as our questions become more advanced, right? rather than like what I was immersed in at Columbia was like, it was horrible. I mean, I got out of there alive and I learned a lot, but when I had to sit down at my desk for the first time and use it as a tool, there was so much in my head that I didn't even know that it was as simple as, oh, here's that library that all I have to do is pull in data profiler and I can look at all my census data within 10 minutes.
Mhm. Awesome, awesome. We got another question from Kathy. Kathy's saying, "Thanks, Bonnie. She was curious to know how you deal with small numbers in your data sets, especially when stratifying by lots of different races and/or other variables, and also how you communicate about this uncertainty as well."
You have to be very transparent, and a lot of times, a lot of the data, this data that you're looking at is data that's like, the stuff that I do like professionally, where it's not just a workshop or a class, is usually coming from within a health system or within an EHR system where we have rules like you can't report something if it's less than this amount, because you have to protect privacy. Even though
Mhm.
things are de-identified, there's a way that you could re-identify it if you had nefarious
Sure.
intentions.
Yeah.
So you decide that, if it's less than this amount of people, or if the margin of error is greater than what I can calculate with this population, we're going to have to suppress that data. So this is best data practices that you do when you've articulated your question, formulated it, and you start looking at the different data types. And that's a lot of the reason why when people are trying to look at bias in races, it's not to be discriminatory against other populations, but the numbers just aren't there, or they're not reported in a way where we can say something meaningful. We can kind of say, well, that's an interesting pattern, let me explore deeper and then go within that population. But for comparative purposes, it's hard. And I always, as long as you're transparent about how you came to um, your thought or your whatever your outcome is, then I feel like the smaller populations are just as important to the conversation as the larger.
Yeah, very true. Very true. It's always interesting too to have that conversation of how small do you go, and just to see how that can. Sometimes that conversation can take months, and that can become an issue in itself.
Or you can find different data. If you're looking,
Sure.
you can go Indian Health Services. You can get access to different buckets of data. You can decide to do community level data. You can go into a community center. You can go into, there's lots of ways to find data that should be emblematic of larger populations. If you're doing a random selection, or maybe you just want to talk about that one population, that's okay too. You don't have to heal the world with every graphic and every visualization. Like, for
True.
example, I'm on a board, Save a Life North Carolina, where we're looking at the high gun violence among youth in my tiny little community. I live in Greensboro, North Carolina, and per capita, we have a higher homicide rate than New York City and Chicago. And we're trying to figure out, why is this happening? And they're just throwing out spreadsheets saying like, oh, already we have this many people. Well, I came in and I overlaid it on food deserts. I put it on population. I put it on by the zip code, by the census tract. And we started looking at different things that we could measure. We're looking at, when you look at the death rate and you stratify by age and by race, under 25s, Black people are dying at a much higher rate than white people. And it's just really interesting to get the granularity, because once you kind of figure out where to intervene, how do I get in? Now, maybe we need to go into the schools versus, maybe another solution you may think, if you're not aware of the particular age group of the violence or the location. And then, I was sitting on a panel for criminal statistics, and I said, we captured data of the dead bodies, which I get, but the person holding the gun is just primed to have an intervention, right?
Oh,
I mean,
absolutely.
the body is this person was a victim. not to say that they were, innocently at that situation, but we only look at one side of the coin usually.
Very true. Excellent answer there too. I'm sure Kathy appreciates that. Two more questions. Well, I guess two questions from Yi here. Number one, she's asking about the Python code and if it's going to be available to use as a sample.
As
And
what?
the Python code that you'd used in your slide earlier, she was asking if it was available to share with
Oh,
the.
she could just ask me, and I'll send her like a bunch of it. I put over in on the website on the blog, but
Okay.
I can share that. I have Colab. You can go to Colab, which is just free, and you can just run Python in there. Or GitHub is the best repository for finding code that you can use and reuse and perfect and improve and have your own little um, receptacle for
True.
good code.
It's exactly what it's set up for. So all right, great, great.
But
And
sometimes GitHub overwhelms people. So depending on where she is in her data journey, reach out to me and I can send you some links or some copies of the code.
right.
Because you can't really share a Tableau story like the way you can like a slide deck.
I guess so. I guess in a way you could possibly put it up on public, but it's
Oh
still.
yeah, I'll do that. I will do that. I'm sorry.
Oh no,
Duh.
no, it's just another idea.
I'm
It
just
was.
getting into that Tableau public vibe. I don't really have much there, so
Oh,
I'll get it up there.
oh, definitely, definitely. Also, there's the other question she had is do you have a class for the public? Do you teach? I guess out openly. Perhaps
No,
different sessions.
I do it privately in the dark.
Okay.
Well, no, depending on where she is geographically, I do teach in my local community, like at community colleges and grad schools and things like that. But what I tend to do, and if she has a particular interest, I'll do like once or twice a month, I'll do like a free workshop. If someone shoots out a topic, because here's how I look at it. I look at it that if 20 or 30 people show up for a freebie, sometimes it's much more, and we spend an hour together, maybe a quarter of those people are like, hey, got it, I'm going to go back to my office and I think I can do something with this. And then there's going to be like one or two that are like, I need to know more, my job, I want to advance my skills. And then I do one-on-one workshops that are relatively inexpensive when you see how much it costs to go take a course or something like that. So there's all like ways to engage, and if you look on that collaborative page, there's something like that. And I just did one with a group of like 30 or 25 people, stayed all the way through. That was a paid workshop where they actually learned an actual skill, and then I do a lot of the open ones where we'll just talk about something and interact and have a lot of interactivity. And sometimes it's about answering a question, sometimes it's about finding data. If she wants to reach out to me, I have like hidden videos on YouTube that I'll give her a link to that are about sourcing data, analyzing data, that answer a bunch of those questions.
Great, great. Yeah, she just mentioned she said she'd send an email out, so she said thank you.
Yep.
Great, great. Well, Buddy, thanks so much. This has been incredibly, I guess, not just informational, but also definitely entertaining. I know also from really the data world, it's always nice to always see different ways and different approaches of going through and doing the analysis that we do.
Well, I feel like it's a safe space if I'm going to share my peculiarity in my Netflix profile with people.
Oh, very safe with this group, and it's definitely a great community. So thank you so much for coming out. We've got a few more minutes for the Tableau adoption panel, and I see folks coming through and getting ready for the panel. So